Hello, everybody. Hello, Paul in San Francisco. Hello, Jonathan in London. When I say hello, Paul, I should say good morning, Paul in San Francisco. Good afternoon, Paul and Tony in England, in London. And I'm speaking from outside London. And I just want to welcome you all and thank you immediately for joining our little group. And we're going to talk about the opera Midsummer Night's Dream, which would be starting rehearsing as we speak. And so we're putting this little program together to celebrate the opera, to celebrate your collaboration in it, and to engage with our audience at the Grange and to show that we haven't forgotten about them and hopefully they haven't forgotten about us. So I'm going to start with, starting with Paul, and then I'm going to talk to Tony, and then I'm going to talk to Jonathan. When I say talk to, I'm going to encourage you just to speak, ad-lib a little bit about your role in this particular production. And so I'm now going to encourage you all go to speaker view so that we just have each person speaking rather than the whole lot of us. And then I'm going to say hello to Paul. So speaker view.
Yep.
And Paul, you and I first met some 30 years ago.
Yes.
You were supposedly assisting, but I think probably more leading on what became quite a successful production of this opera in Sydney with what was then called Australian Opera.
Australia.
And now
yes.
It's the other way around. And the production was by Baz Luhrmann, famous filmmaker, and we all had a fantastically good time, and it was great to meet you there. And since then, you've gone on to extraordinary eminence in the world of, the global world of opera, and we're very, very lucky to have you at the Grange. So what I'm going to ask you is, I know that you and this opera have long and intimate relationships on many occasions. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about your history with this opera and then how you conceive that it might be in the production you're planning for the Grange.
I started working on Midsummer Night's Dream, first of all, in 1992 and preparing it for 1993, which is, I think, Michael, when we first did it in Sydney, in Australia. We then did it again in probably Melbourne, then we did it again at the Edinburgh Festival in 94. So Dream has been part of my life now, my working life for nearly 30 years, actually. It's actually the opera I've done the most often in my life. Most people it's Carmen or Bohème, but for me it's actually Midsummer Night's Dream. And it sort of chased me every couple of years to do it again and in a way rethink it. And I always get asked this question, interviewers ask me and Cast ask me, how can you rethink this, how do you do a new production of it when you've done it so often before? And the answer is it's really not hard, because it's a immensely complicated and complex and fascinating piece. So I sort of love coming to the Dream every time. It never feels routine, and it always feels like I get it, and it's always what, I mean, you sang it often enough, Michael. You must have you open a page and you go, oh, that, right, yes, there must be blah, blah, blah. I missed that last time. So that's kind of how I feel when I get to it. But actually, the biggest thing about doing Dream for me, it really is the cast, because it's a cast of, 14 people or something like that, plus all those kids. And every time I've done it, it's been a different experience, because you have a different group of people with a different chemistry, a different experience. Very often they don't even speak English, and they're all getting together, and that's kind of fascinating. So yeah, so I always come to it with great joy and great expectation, and I'm very, very much looking forward to 21 doing it again.
I just remember an occasion when doing it in Strasbourg in the Robert Carson production, which had many iterations around Europe over many years, the company, the stage manager saying repeatedly, or this ASM in rehearsal, right the way from month, let's go from the first scene, let's go from when it says, I'll meet by moonlight Pride Titania, and little realizing that it was actually
ill-met.
Yes, and I said this to her repeatedly over a month, and she never quite understood. Anyway, that was another way. So let's talk a little bit then in detail about this, the Grange, which is actually a version of a production, a very, very successful production. Yeah. You did started at Valencia and then has been to various other places. Would you like to say a bit about that?
So the production I did that we're having at the Grange, I sort of went in a way back to basics. Like say, I went back to Shakespeare's play, and I went back to setting it in a way around a Greek ruin somewhere. As we know, Shakespeare never went to Athens or Greece or anything like that. He never left England. But his fantasy was to take it to what was then known as the extremities of the known world. You know, it was the end of or the beginning of what we call Western civilization, and sort of, you know, the furthest away before you get into Asia and all that. So I went there because I wanted it to be somewhere where a bunch of English people were uncomfortable, which I think is what Shakespeare's doing in the piece. And also this production, actually, first idea for this production came from the Teatro San Carlo in Naples in 2001 or 2 or something like that, when I was asked to do a production, but also told by the management, oh, by the way, we have no money. And I was like, oh, well, that's useful. And I said, would you, by no money, you mean you have a minimal budget? And I remember the then artistic director, the wonderful Carlo Meyer, saying to me, no, we have no money. We have zero money. I was like, oh, that's good. He said, we can pay the singers, but we have nothing for sets of costumes. So I was charged with do it or don't do it. And I thought, oh, okay. So I came up with a design in my head. I started to scribble it down on paper. And then, having no money, I said, what do we have? And he said, well, we have lots of resources. We can use the painters, we can use the carpenters. They're all on salary. So it really was like recycled opera. So I went to the San Carlo is a, vastly famous theatre. It's the oldest theatre in Italy, actually, from 1737. And I went to their deposito, as it's called, their storeroom, and I said, show me old productions of Semiramide, of Nabucco, of Parsifal, because I knew the big grass. I said, show me anything that you had. So literally I went through, it was like IKEA with a shopping trolley, going through the aisles of this thing, looking for stuff, and they all thought I was mental. I suppose I was. So I got all these things together, and I made a sort of Oracle of Delphi out of some columns from Nabucco and other columns and bits and pieces from Semiramide, and I covered it in grass from an ancient production of Parsifal, and I put a cyc around it and lit it, and we did all of that, and hey presto, we actually had a production. And it worked. It worked. So that was the basis of what this production is at the Grange, and that's what we were taking. So it's the same setting for all 3 acts that changes rather dramatically with lighting and all sorts of things, and one little twist in the middle of it, which I'm not going to give away. So you come and see it 2021, see what a little twist is. That was where it came from, and a little bit like our situation today with COVID-19. Where necessity really does become the mother of invention. That was exactly how it happened, and I was very happy to come up with that solution. So, yeah, that's how it started, and on she goes. This production keeps going.
Fantastic. Do you think the wood, the forest, plays a huge part? Well, it certainly does in Shakespeare's play. In the opera, it obviously does as well. How does it play a part in your show?
I would say that the forest, or the wood, as they call it there, is probably the second biggest character in the piece after Bottom. In that it's, in a Shakespearean world, that's what we would call pre-Freudian. It represents, in many ways, it's a metaphor for the mind. It's a metaphor for fear. It's a metaphor for it takes place at night. So it's very much a character that people are getting lost in their own heads, and people are getting lost within the scariness of what changes are taking place around them. So it's a vitally important character within the piece, and it takes place in this production where the columns of the Oracle of Delphi very much represent that forest, so they can be lit through to make it look very shadowy, so you get the presence of the moon, or it can be it can be just simply open. The other major thing in the piece is, again, the presence of the moon. And the moon, the idea of the moon in the Midsummer Night's Dream is very much shining light on darkness, shining a path on the darkness of the situation, the darkness of the night, or running away, eloping, or all those things that happen in the piece. So yeah, it's a very big presence, and it's a presence that I'm totally aware of in doing the piece.
Fantastic. I'd love to continue talking to you, but we're going to try and make this as crisp and as brief as we can. So I'm going to move on now to the conductor of this production, Anthony Kraus. You've well known to the Grange or the Grange Festival, certainly, in having been in charge of our chorus for a few years, extremely successfully, if I may say so. And it was wonderful to be able to give you the opportunity of doing a full production. Famously, chorus directors don't often get the invitation to the step up. It seemed so obvious to me that you were right for this piece, so that it was a no-brainer to me. And particularly as I suspect you've got quite a long, I think you've got a history of working in Britain's music. So Tony, would you like to sort of talk about I don't think you've conducted before, so how you're sort of approaching this and how you're sort of feeling your way into this whole, the opera, the piece, the score, and this production?
Yeah, I feel like the new boy on this in this really. Obviously, you've sung this piece many times. Paul's obviously directed it many times, and I've got I think it's an unenviable job of discovering it sort of for the first time from the inside. I've seen the piece many times, seen the play many times as well. And although I've worked on several Britten operas, Peter Grimes, Death in Venice, Albert Herring, Turn of the Screw, this is the first time I've actually worked on this piece. So I'm really looking forward to it. I suppose the preparation comes from reading the play, reading the text. That's how we always start. And I think what's lovely about this piece is that I think it's the only time, apart from Noah's flood, that Britten took an existing text rather than have one created for him. Obviously, they adapted and cut down the Shakespeare an awful lot. But it's wonderful to see how he approaches the piece textually and what he leaves out, what he keeps in. Musically, I just adore this piece from the very first chord to the very last chord. And one of the things that struck me about the way Britten sort of characterizes is that he uses different groups of instruments for different people. So the fairies get a lot of music with the harps and the percussion, and the lovers is more conventional, and the rustics is very much uses the bassoon and the trombone, sort of the comedy instruments, to characterize them. So I suppose coming at it, I've really been immersing myself in the orchestration and how he fills the sound, each different sound world, each layer. Yes, and it's been an absolute joy to study.
Fantastic, Tony. It's quite sort of salutary to think that this was first done in quite a small village hall in Suffolk. And it's not a huge band, but I mean, it feels like quite a big band in the range of sounds that the score produces.
Yeah, I mean, God, yeah, and I mean, Britten is, and you look at some of the bigger operas, like Peter Grimes or Billy Budd, and he has a vast canvas of orchestral forces at his disposal, but he very rarely uses them all at the same time. Yes, it was premiered in 1960 in the Jubilee Hall in Aldborough, which is a very small hall. I know, I've never seen a performance there. The only time I've used it was when I was working on Peter Grimes on Aldborough Beach, and we used it as the chorus changing room and makeup room, and it was only just big enough for them. So, but it's a tiny stage and it's a tiny orchestra, and Britten, he uses a small wind, very small brass section, 2 harps though. He was quite extravagant in with the harps, but yes, it was designed for a very small space, and he specifies a minimum number of strings. And it really does. It feels like chamber music most of the time. There are very few sort of big grand gestures, apart from perhaps the march going into the Athenian final scene. But yeah, it's very much chamber music, very exposed.
Theseus's opening phrase comes with quite a big, luscious, voluptuous orchestral sound. If I'm being, as he and Hippolyta start opening things, it's wonderful. But apart from that, I quite say it's landed translucent scoring. And of our cast, which I'm prodigiously proud of our cast, I have to say. Presumably you know quite a lot of them and you've worked with them before.
I know many of them. Actually, Jonathan is one of the few that I haven't worked with before. I don't believe. I know it's going to be a wonderful experience. Some of them worked with in Leeds in my former incarnation, but yeah, it's a very talented, very lively cast. I think rehearsals are going to be a lot of fun.
That seems to be the essence of this. So now on to, well, the principal cast member, I have to say, as Paul said, on to the biggest part of all, which is Bottom. A great colleague of ours, Chris Gillett, famously wrote a sort of book about his semi-biographical book about his memories of the profession, particularly centered around this opera, because he's done this opera so many times, either as flute or Lysander. And the title of the book is Who's My Bottom? So Who's Our Bottom is Jonathan. And thank you, welcome to this little program, Jonathan. Is Bottom something you've done a lot before?
Yes, Bottom was, I think, my college debut at the Royal College of Music. I did a production with Sir John Copley, and that was my baptism into the piece. I do love the fact it's such an ensemble piece. I do love the fact that Bottom, even having a so-called principal or a starring role, is very much just part of a group of people. I love the natural symbiosis or the natural banter that it feels so conversational, it feels so natural, it seems to flow. And if you have the right people, which I think we do in this production, it can just be conversational and everyone has a moment to shine. That's all the piece that's what I've always enjoyed about the piece. The other thing I really, I've actually done a Paul Curran production. I did it in Palermo. Just a couple of years ago, I think. And I think it was...
right. Yes, it was the same production.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's the kind of thing, I guess,
the
do
same
so many
production.
productions, you hear these, I hear there are columns in there, and it's, yeah.
Well, we'll
Ding, 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 ding.
we'll see you at the dress rehearsal. That's fine.
Yes.
No, I sang
in the
quite
back
that day. It's also the wonderful thing about this piece is that I'm sure all of us who have either played or sang have done, I don't know, I don't think you, could you have done any other roles, Michael, maybe in your younger years?
What, in the piece? No, don't think so.
you did actually, Michael Chance. Michael Chance, you did. Don't say you didn't. I was there. There was one night where you sang the role. Everybody's very tired. There was one night you sang the role of Demetrius for us in Sydney, in Australia. And then our Demetrius, Paul Whelan, decided he would give us a little bit of Oberon. And much hilarity ensued. Which left what our esteemed director very puzzled. He was wondering what the hell was going on. I remember it vividly.
I've actually forgotten that. Awful. Paul, the idea of 10 foot 15 Paul Whelan singing in falsetto is quite amusing, I have to say.
Yeah, it was at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, whatever it was. Yeah.
But I've sung Quince, I've sung Snug, I've sung Bottom, and I've sung the low notes of Theseus off stage. So yeah, I kind of feel like I know little bits and pieces of that piece probably more than I should do. But
Jonathan, you know you've just exposed yourself that you can never get any of the ensembles wrong now. having sung the bass and the harmony of the entirety of the opera, you cannot get any of it wrong. You're going to be attacked viciously. Yeah. I'm telling you now.
Well, I'm used to it.
The music police will be out in force.
Yes.
What I also love of the fact is that doing it in Britain is that I know that it is a very specific orchestral technique, in my view, playing Britain. And I do really believe that English and British orchestras have it over other countries and styles. It is really specific, and I feel most of all the players have been brought up in this kind of style. The amount of times I've gone to, say, Spain or Italy and just heard it and gone, that's an option. On the first day of rehearsal, it's just a really stylistic thing, and I think doing it in Britain just makes it extra special because you have stylistic playing, you have real history with the piece, and I think it's going to really shine.
Fantastic. There's one thing I'd like us all to comment on, that Benjamin Britten's operas are really done as mainstream pretty much all over the world, but certainly in rural Britain, if not in London, other cities, Britain is still considered with a slight degree of suspicion by your average opera goer. And I'd just like you to sort of think of something you can say, as if to say, this is such fabulous entertainment, this opera, apart from anything else. And so, Jonathan, would you like to say anything about Singing Britain and how it's appealing for a general audience?
It's just lyrical. It's written so well. It sounds conversational. You know, it could be a sitcom. I think all the things that we think about opera being Waileyan, legato, and bel canto arias, that's a style, that's an option. But I really do believe this has so much to offer theatrically and musically. It has much motif work as any Wagnerian opera I can think of. And so if you are able to open your mind and just really see it for what it is, it's absolute masterpiece of theatre and music.
Great. Tony, would you like to say something about that?
Yeah, I would. I think British audiences, certainly as you say, outside of the major cosmopolitan centres, do view it with a degree of suspicion. But if you come to this and engage with the atmosphere, I think David Parry said something the other day. I was watching him talking about Cenerentola. He said, "Submit to the drug." And I think that's a very, very good way of thinking about this. Don't come in with an attitude, oh, this is difficult, this is going to be slightly difficult to listen to. If you just relax and allow the music and the drama to wash over you. I mean, what other opera starts with all these fairies singing over hill, over dale with the most gloriously joyous music? I think from that, if you just come in and enjoy that, you will be entertained for the full 3.5 hours, whatever it is.
Fantastic. And Paul, your production of Death in Venice a few years ago at Garsington had massive acclaim. I sadly didn't see it, but everybody's still talking about it. And I think you're pretty much steeped in Britain, as steeped in the other composer. Would you like to say something in general about Britain, but also about this opera?
Well, I'm very lucky to have done a lot of Britain, like Grimes 9 times, Dream 16 times, and all sorts of Britain pieces. And actually, what sticks in my mind is the first time I ever did it in Italy, in Naples, at the San Carlo. The San Carlo is a vast theatre, and this is a chamber opera essentially. I remember the dress rehearsal was maybe 25% full, maybe 25%. By the beginning of Act 3, the dress rehearsal was nearly full because the word had gone ba 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 around the people that were there, sending messages to friends and family saying, oh, you got to come and see this. And we were sort of astonished that the Italians all crowded in, to free dress rehearsal, of course, to see this Benjamin Britten opera. They thought it was absolutely fantastic. They thought it was melodic, and they kept saying, ma bel canto, bel cantistico. They were all crazy about how melodic and beautiful it was. So my experience of Britain is that it always surprises people. And I think you only need to look at something like Peter Grimes or The Rape of Lucretia or Albert Herring, the ones that he wrote just after the war, to discover the many influences that you can hear on Britain. Some of them are from Broadway. A lot of it sounds like Gershwin with syncopation and all that sort of thing. But others, you hear what Sadler's Wells Opera were touring at that time. They were touring Cenerentola, Rigoletto, and Madame Butterfly. And you actually, if you listen to it, you can hear harmonically where it's going into Butterfly. You can hear in the big ensembles where he's been listening a lot to the end of Rigoletto, or certainly where he's been listening to Rossini and Cenerentola, and as Jonathan's talking about, the conversational element of it. So I think the main thing is with Benjamin Britten is, yeah, take the drug. I mean, just let it have its effect, because I think Britain always leaves you more astonished than questioning. I think you always leave the theatre going, that was a far greater experience than I'd anticipated. And you could say maybe the same of Janacek often. My advice is, if you see a Britten opera, run to it, because it's a fantastic theatrical night out. It's not just the singing, it's not just the music, it's not just the production. It's actually really the whole thing together. It's great music theatre.
Fantastic, very well said. So we're going to end. Thank you all for this so much, and it's insightful and a huge invitation, I think, to those who haven't yet signed up to come and come to our Dream next year at the Grange. So Jonathan and Tony are going to do a remote piece excerpt from this aria, from this opera, the scene known as Bottom's Dream. So, Jonathan, would you like to talk a little bit about that? And then we'll end with your rendering of this wonderful piece of music. Thank you all.
Yeah, I think Bottom's Dream for me is pure theatre, and it's one of the few moments, certainly for the role of Bottom, to have, I guess, a moment of peace and quiet. It's normally trying to take over every conversation near or within Cooey of himself. And I like the fact that he doesn't have the answers. And I like the fact that he has slightly lost confidence in whatever reality is. And that's a lovely little journey of his. Clearly he finds his mojo by the end of the dream. But I do like the fact that he is toying or struggling with, is this just my mind's imagination, or is this a dream, or did it really happen?
Thank you very much. And we're now going to hear you and Tony do it from your respective homes. See you next year.
When my cue comes, call me, and I will answer. My next is most fair Pyramus, fair Pyramus. Hey ho, hey ho, Peter Quince, flute the pedals bender, snarl the tinker, starving. God's my life, stolen hands, and left me asleep. I have had a dream, past the wit of man, to say what dream it was. Methought I was, there is no man can tell what. Methought I was, and methought I had. But man is but an ass, if he can offer to say what methought I had. The eye of man hath not heard, the ear of man hath not seen, man's hand is not able to taste, his tongue to conceive, nor his heart to report. What my dream was, what my dream was, my dream. I will get Peter Quince, the carpenter, to write a ballad of his dream, and it shall be called Bottom's Dream, Bottom's Dream, because it hath no bottom. And I will sing it in the latter end of the play, before the Duke, peradventure to make it the more gracious, I shall sing it at a day.